it wasn't enough that we were operating, in a climate for crypto that was poorly defined, if I'm being generous, in terms of regulation and rules that applied. But as you point out, we decided to take an even more challenging path to life as a public company, which was to do it through a direct listing. Which, for those of you watching who may be less familiar, is an alternative to the traditional IPO process, where you have investment banks and underwriters essentially serving as an intermediary between the company and investors. Instead, we were going to take a much more direct path that didn't involve us offering new equity or taking on additional fundraising as part of the exercise. And the law again was starting to take shape around that, and the process around that was still relatively new. And so we had to really build quickly a lot of muscle to be able to meet the exacting expectations of the Securities and Exchange Commission, so that they would permit us to move forward with that approach. A certain irony you might pick up on, James, is that as a result of that, in early 2021, the SEC undertook an incredibly detailed examination of every facet of our business, how we listed assets, what our process was for assuring that we weren't in violation of federal securities laws. All of those issues were considered, and they ultimately decided that we were good to go and approved us in April of 21, only to a short while later reverse course and decide that effectively our entire business was one big violation of the federal securities laws in their view.
Exactly. I believe it was a couple of weeks after the direct listing in April of 2021 that Gary Gensler had his first testimony before Congress. It was COVID, and it was done over Zoom. And he said very, very clearly, we here at the SEC do not have authority to regulate these crypto exchanges, and we would really appreciate it if Congress would consider establishing a regulatory framework where we at the SEC would have responsibility for regulating these crypto exchanges, because we do not have that authority now. And then something weird happened, Paul. And
well, that's one word, James. Weird is one word for what happened. That's for sure.
At some point, and now I'm pretty on top of this timeline, but I don't remember. I remember you getting sued. I don't remember when you got the wells, or I don't know when the investigation began, but you got sued in 2023, where Gensler and the Division of Enforcement took the exact opposite position, even though Congress had passed no law granting Gary Gensler the authority that he requested. He came to the epiphany that he had all the authority he needed to shut you down and take the position that basically the business model of the public company called Coinbase was illegal.
That's exactly.
So what was that experience for you?
Well, it was, to say it was tumultuous would be an understatement. I mean, look, when we were finally permitted to list, and as you point out, when Mr. Gensler testified a few weeks later, we were elated, obviously, because not only had we accomplished, this very important milestone in our company's history, but we had on record, effectively under oath before Congress, confirmation from the chair of the SEC that our read of the law was correct, and that if Congress wanted something done about digital assets and cryptocurrency platforms like Coinbase, they need to pass legislation. And so, for a brief moment, we thought this is incredible. We have absolute alignment with the one appointed official who is most important on this question. And then things began to change, and they began to change relatively quickly. And while I always hesitate, James, as I know you do, to ascribe motives to anyone. You always like to assume good intent, particularly in our public officials. in hindsight, it's obvious. It's obvious that what happened was that the politics for Mr. Gensler changed dramatically, and he ultimately reached a very different political calculation and conclusion as to what his path forward would be in terms of his own personal ambition and what was required in order for him to achieve it. All that meant that by 2023, as you point out, Mr. Gensler took a very different view, essentially the opposite view of what he had testified before Congress on just a short while before. And we soon found ourselves on the receiving end of a Wells notice at first, indicating that there was a preliminary conclusion that we had violated the federal securities laws. And from there, a federal lawsuit against Coinbase declaring that the entire company was in violation of the federal securities laws that were fundamental to our business and put us at fundamental risk.
Right. And it wasn't just the SEC. I think that's important for people
Right.
to understand. There were it was kind of a whole of government effort. And if you look at the some sort of annual report, I've forgotten the title of it, that's produced by the White House. And it had a section about crypto that basically said crypto is a scourge on the planet, and we've got to fight this thing and beat it back. You had the executive, you had this super powerful senator who the Democrats were in the majority, and so very powerful senator saying that she was going to form an army, and the only purpose to form an army is to conduct war.
Correct.
She wanted to have a war on the crypto industry, and then you had the regulators on the banking side who were trying to choke off all of the participants in the entire industry. And so you had to organize a response to this multi-pronged attack, which had a political component as well, because I think you rightly diagnosed that the calculus for Gary Gensler had changed, and this was a very political situation where a pushback had to happen. And then at some point, you become, I'm going to use a Barack Obama term, you become a community organizer to stand with crypto off the ground, which is the most successful, startup of any grassroots organization I've ever seen in my life. But there were all of these components, and then you decided to go on offense against the SEC and demand that they make rules and stew them in the Third Circuit to just get them to answer if they were going to get, off the dime and make any rules, and getting to Capitol Hill to make sure they understand the really important thing, which is Coinbase is a public company with audited financials and is not FTX. All of these things really required you to use all of your skills. And that is the reason I wanted to start from the beginning of all of these building blocks of you having this technical knowledge from MIT and going to this great law school and being a patent lawyer and being a judge and working at Facebook, building upon all of this stuff. It's almost as if, Paul, you had been preparing your whole life for this fight.
Well, it certainly felt that way in the moment. At the same time, though, James, I think it's also important to acknowledge that there were many others fighting alongside us, and many who were actually fighting even before we got dragged into this entire regulation by enforcement campaign. I think of people like Stu Alderati, John Deaton, folks who really bore the brunt of Mr. Gensler's early efforts to try to crack down on crypto and essentially stamp it out before it could become large enough and broad enough to have a movement of regular people behind it. I give a lot of those folks a lot of credit for holding the SEC at bay for as long as they did. By the time we were brought into the fight, the politics of this were frankly clear, and the ambition that Gensler had was rather naked. And so we knew early on that, as confident as we were in our ability to fight this in court, that we had to fight this on the street and in Congress just as hard if we were going to ultimately prevail. And that's really where the motivation came to lend our support to grassroots efforts like Stand with Crypto, because it became abundantly clear that when you have tens of millions of Americans owning cryptocurrencies and caring deeply about their right to do so, and their ability to have choice in the financial system that had been denied to them for so long, we needed to build a movement to capture that energy and make clear to our public officials that this was not just one company or one industry's fight. This was everyone's fight. And at the same time, it was critically important that in a political system, as you know well, that unfortunately requires significant resources in order to influence how our elected officials ultimately operate. We need to marshal resources on behalf of the industry, and in that regard, we lent support to Fairshake, which supported pro-crypto candidates in Congress on both sides of the aisle, because we thought it was important to stand with the people who would stand with us and stand with our entire community, even as we fought all these different battles. And over the course of the year that followed, or so, the 18 months maybe that followed, I think we proved that the crypto voter was real, that the voice of the crypto community was strong. And with that, I think, we saw results last fall that have resulted in an absolute transformation in the conversation in Washington, and an absolute transformation in the opportunity we finally have to get crypto right. And that's what I'm most excited about as we look ahead.
Yeah, you said a lot there. And I really appreciate you calling out Ripple and Stu Alvarado
Absolutely.
and Garlinghouse, because, man, when they were attacked, it was a lonely spot.
Sure was.
For them. A lot of people in crypto are thinking, well, maybe they'll just stop with Ripple, an XRP. Who knows? Kind of fingers crossed. And we're not getting a tremendous amount of support from the industry. And I knew nothing about I was practicing law up until 2022. I really did not understand the inception of that case and how problematic and suspicious it was. But in any event, yeah, thank God they have had the wherewithal and, the fighting spirit to signal very clearly, we're going to the Supreme Court, so we're going to fight you every step of the way. And so the way I viewed the entire chessboard was, if they could stop Ripple and establish that XRP was an investment contract in and of itself, which is so ridiculous. And then the second piece was, then all of the exchanges were somehow engaged in trading of free-floating investment contracts, where I don't even know who the counterparties were on these investment contracts. But leave that aside. Then you're done. Then you have killed the crypto industry, because if XRP is a security, everybody's pretty much a security, except for that weird Hinman Ethereum thing, which is outside of the scope of this conversation. But if you get Coinbase, and then of course the others came, Kraken and Binance and the rest, then you've accomplished, you've won the war. You've won Elizabeth Warren's war. So it required wherewithal and determination. And you guys really showed it. And I became fans, just from the sidelines. I'm in the peanut gallery. I showed up to the hearing you had before Judge Fela in New York, where I used to practice law quite a bit in that court. I just wanted to be there. And I was shocked. And, we've been around a long time, Paul. It's not easy to shock us.
No.
But the kinds of things that the SEC was saying were so obviously wrong. And the problem was that those of us familiar with the crypto community knew it was wrong. But there's no way for the federal judge who's got hundreds of other cases on her docket to know when they said
But
the reason Bitcoin is not a security as opposed to these other 10 that are trading on the Coinbase platform is Bitcoin has no ecosystem associated with it. And I was sitting next to John Deaton in the courtroom there, and we just dropped our heads, shaking our heads like, these are good, these are smart lawyers, and they're saying stuff they must know is not true. There's like an enormous ecosystem around
it was an
Bitcoin.
absolutely shocking moment, James. And I have to say, going back to Ripple's fight and XRP's fight much earlier in the timeline. You'll know well because you follow these issues carefully that when the SEC back in 2020 first took on XRP, many exchanges, including Coinbase, had a very tough decision to make, which is, do we continue to list XRP or do we pause it? And, if I have one regret over this entire fight we've had with the commission now going back 4 years, it was at that moment believing still that the SEC itself was acting in good faith. All of us want to believe that we are served by agencies that are operating in good faith. And, we took to heart, the allegations that they raised and the concerns that they presented. And we chose at that point to pause that listing. I very much regret that was our decision at the time. I think it was made for all of the right reasons. But when it became abundantly clear as that case started to fall apart that the SEC had no basis for that claim, we ultimately decided it was time to relist XRP, and I was delighted that we were able to do that. But to come back to the moment you call out, to hear the commission's lawyers present this made-up theory on the fly that somehow Bitcoin had no ecosystem, but these other tokens did. That's when it became abundantly clear to me that these were not arguments being presented in good faith. I hate to say that, but no self-respecting lawyer could stand behind those arguments and somehow claim to be operating in good faith.
And we don't like saying that.
No, we don't.
The reason we don't like saying that is the SEC has had a reputation of integrity, and a critical part of the reason that the U.S. capital markets are preeminent, where the SEC was the cop on the beat. And so we're not, we don't like saying what you just said, but I agree with what you said. And it, to me, it goes back to leadership.
Correct.
Correct. That this kind of crossing the line was okay in the Gensler era. I don't know why, but it was, and we saw that in a number of cases.
Well, anytime, James, you have a government agency, or frankly any group of lawyers more focused on winning than following the law, terrible things follow. And we've seen this over and over again. I think in the case of the SEC and its war on crypto, we have perhaps the best example of that.
Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. Look, if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button and check out the video here on the right-hand side. I'm sure you'll enjoy that one as well. And if you're ready for more, go to realvision.com/join. I'll see you there.